You're listening to the Healing Mirror podcast, Non-Dual Reflections with Soraya Saraswati. And getting in touch with the sense of being, the sense of aliveness, the sense of I am presence. That sense that we often locate in the physical body. But let's not make the body a boundary. Allow this sense of aliveness or I am presence to be boundaryless, expanding beyond the skin. Feeling that sense of expansion and just staying in touch with that as we sit in silence. Simply noticing any arisings. And staying with that sense of silent aliveness, the sense of presence, of being, without an object, without a name, without an attachment. There may be a noticing of any arisings. Within that sense of aliveness or presence. And then taking a couple of deep breaths as that expanded sense of aliveness or I am presence relocates itself back to the boundary of the physical body. Feeling the body sitting in the chair. Grounding back into the physical, individual, separate self, but knowing that this is only so that we can interact in the world of objects. That consciousness itself is boundless, limitless, all that is. And take a deep breath in and out. When you're ready, open the eyes. Namaste. Tonight, and you have a question, just pop your hand up when there's a pause in speaking. There's only a few of us here tonight, and I'll pass over to you for your questions. But I thought I would just begin by talking a little bit. Of course, the elephant in everyone's room at the moment is the coronavirus and the limitations that perhaps that's putting on people. We're having to reassess our travel to Europe this year, and I'm having to reassess my group that I'm taking to Nepal and Mount Kailash. So lots of people are having to reassess what they're doing. But this is one of the qualities that we, as we're awakening, develop. And that is, we understand that we are not in control. We, the separate individual self, are not in control at all of our lives or what is going to happen next in our lives. And it's a very, very interesting pointer that, you know, I've been looking forward, for instance, to this trip to Tibet in my 60th year for quite a while now. And when I saw that, well, perhaps that won't happen, I went, well, perhaps that won't happen. You know, can we just be flexible enough to actually be with what is? So letting go of those individual desires or the individual need to control what's happening in our lives. And who would have thought that a little virus could affect the global market, the global travel, the global health system, closing borders? It just shows you how interestingly fragile the world actually is, and how important it is if we are going to remain as consciousness itself, which is in a state of peace, calm, acceptance. The one thing that's happening is the consciousness behind the dramas that are playing out through so-called separate individuals, so-called separate countries, and the objects, the world of object and subject. If we are going to maintain a place of equilibrium, then the only way to do that is to remember that we are the solitary subject, observing the play of life and having peace in the ability to be with whatever is. Which brings me to something that I was contemplating over the weekend. I've had one of my sons come to visit, and it's been a bit of a family time with my new grandson and so on. But also one of my sons ended up in hospital, and I ended up spending half a day in the hospital in emergency ward with him today. And of course, this is a hospital where they say they've had coronavirus, and everyone's handing out masks. It was very interesting to be there with the whole implementation of washing hands, etc. And just to be there and feel calm within that, and just be with what was happening in the hospital, but also in my son, who dislocated his knee and has probably torn his cruciate ligaments in his knee. So he was in a lot of pain. And just being able to pace that these, in this time, this modern time, when we speak of time now, the spiritual warrior, or those that are awakening to know that we are consciousness expressing as multiplicity and diversity. We are being asked to be instruments. Make me an instrument of peace. It's one of the songs that Terry and I actually sing in our concerts. And we're really not being directed as it was, thousands of years ago, to go to the forest and be with nature and sit in meditation. We're actually being asked to be an active part of service on the planet in different ways. And that calling is made obvious to us with what is arising in the daily life. And after having a spiritual awakening, which most people, all people in this room have had to some degree, we're being asked to step into continual clarity, to keep coming back to clearing, as those old patterns of fear may arise, as old patterns of reaction may arise. We're being asked to shine the light of that conscious awareness which we are, and see through those and remain that one love, that one consciousness, adaptable, mutable, but calm, steady, so that rather than reaction, when action occurs, that action is clear, it's clean, it's no longer creating karma. So that's what's come out tonight of this voice here. If anyone would like to share, or if you have a question or something to add now, if I can see your face, and I'm sorry, Jessica, I can't see your face. I can just see Galaxy S5 Neo. So you're our sort of intergalactic person there. So if you would like to say something, Jessica, just unmute and say something, or put it in the chat box and then I'll unmute you. Is that a yes, Calliope? I'll unmute you.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that this about becoming clear is that this was my realization also, my realization from the beginning of this thing, I think about 1 week ago, and that I think it's also happening. I can feel it, that it's happening, not just for me, but in general.
Would you like me to speak to that, Calliope?
Yes.
I'll just mute you again so we have a clear recording. Well, you're right. It feels here as if there's an unprecedented number of people awakening on the planet at the moment. And my reaction to that is great, because we need it. But awakening is one thing, and people often share awakening experiences. But that's just an experience. And sometimes people can have an awakening which is, a little bit of stars and lightning and a bit spectacular. But once that's happened, it's just a remembered experience. We can only be awake to this moment. And the level of our awakeness to this moment is where we're at. So once we have seen clearly what we are not limited to this body. We are not limited to a name, a personality, or anything that's been established around this body-mind. Yet we have to function here through this. Once we realize what we are not, and we tap into that wonderful sense of aliveness, that sense of being, that sense of I am presence, then it's very difficult to go back to anything else, isn't it? Yet we will, by default, be tested, because we, the separate individual self, are made up of patterns. We are made up of our history. We are made of our family dynamics, of the traumas perhaps that we have experienced during our life. This is what makes up the separate body-mind. And when we are aiming to remain clear, then those patterns are basically no longer running the show. Rather than being reactive to life, we are present and our action is clear in life. So once we have had an awakening experience, that's not the end of it. Really, perhaps that's just the beginning of it. Because we will notice that old patterns will arise again and again and again to draw us back into a patterned response. In truth, we are all clear and pure, yet we have a character. We all have a different character, which we like to think of as a flavor. Like there's a flavor of Soraya-ness here. And Terry has a flavor of Terry-ness, which is quite unique. And Girish will have a flavor of Girishness, and so on. And that flavor makes us different actors on the stage. But that flavor or that character is partially a result of all the patterns, isn't it? But there is also, there can be a clarity there. And that's what we're talking about here, is clearing and seeing through our old patterned behaviors, our reactions and responses to life. Does that help, Calliope? I'll unmute you.
Yes, of course.
Anything else you want to add to that, Calliope?
No, no, right now not. No.
Any reports that that are being experienced there that you would like to share? Because our sharings help everyone. You know, I know I've spent years clearing, and even now still an old pattern will arise. It's pretty quickly seen through and dropped here now. But that doesn't just stop when someone has an awakening experience. Those patterns will continue to arise. It's how fast we notice them and drop them. Because life is, suffering is optional, and suffering is always a result of the patterns running the show, of an inability for clarity to see through the patterns. Okay, Calliope?
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Very good topic. I'll mute you again now. Anyone else like to share? Initially, when old patterns arise, we'll get caught in their net. And it'll be a little bit of suffering will arise. A little bit of identification will arise. And all of a sudden, we'll notice that there's either emotional pain, or we'll notice that that emotional pain may have transferred into a physical pain in the body. Or we will fall into an old victim role, however that looks for us. Or perhaps it's a righteousness role, or a holier than thee role. All these little roles that pop up from old patterns. Judgment is probably the most insidious one, I find. Judgment of the self, or the perceived separate self, or judgment of others. Either way, that's very, very common. And that judgment, usually of the perceived separate self, is always coming at a time where there isn't clarity, where the clarity's been muddied, the waters have been muddied a little bit. And we're seeing the separate self through the patterned, eyeglasses. So it's like we've put on our old glasses and they're not rose-coloured anymore. They can be all different colours depending on what patterns are there. And then that, of course, can ignite self-doubt, self-judgment, self-flagellation, or it might be directed outward toward others. As soon as any of this happens, we've lost our clarity. And that's okay. It's just that the clearer we get, the quicker that's recognized and the quicker that's dropped and seen through, seen as untruth, seen as an old pattern to do with an old story. So over to you guys now. You've got 30 minutes and it's a precious time together, so please don't be shy. Anything you will say will be something that can help somebody else in this room. This satsang, and why I started this satsang, was because there is a great awakening happening. And that's okay, but a lot of people are clinging to their awakening and forgetting the clearing up is the big job. The clearing is the constant and continuous work that has to happen after an awakening, after a glimpse. Okay, Kathy, I can see your hand up now, so I'm just going to unmute you. Go ahead, Kathy.
I don't know if you can see it, Soraya. I sent you a chat message.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was on a roll and I didn't look at my chat. Can you discuss? I'll read it, Kathy's message. Can you discuss consciousness, in brackets, awareness of, based on feelings, e.g. within the body? Great question and great topic, Kathy. Okay. I've talked about the patterned self, the patterned separate individual self, and that is always to do with a history, And of course, we only ever have this moment, the present moment. Anything that's happened in the past is exactly that. It's history, and it's simply memory. And memory relates to mind. And we are not the mind. We are not our thoughts. This is not what consciousness is. Thoughts are an arising within consciousness, but they're a powerful arising within consciousness. And they can ignite feelings and bodily sensations within this mind body. And very often, if we have a feeling, it might be fear. We might get a constriction in our throat. We might feel a trembling in our body. We might feel a churning in our gut. If we're feeling angry, we might feel heat rising. And, you know, that's why in the cartoons, they always draw those little bits of smoke coming out of the ears when someone's angry, because we feel that heat rising up, and poof, the anger is experienced then often in the head, but it can be a whole body rage as well, where someone's body is overcome by rage, and then the body mind is moved to do things it would not otherwise do, or say things it might not otherwise say. There's also repressed thoughts and repressed emotions, which is often a subconscious denial of an experience which could arise as an emotion or a feeling in the body. And it's pushed away to such an extent that a numbness can begin to occur in the body as well, as if there is no feeling. And that state can become like depression, where depression, there's no joy, there's no sense of aliveness that's readily available to us anymore. We can feel shut off, as if we're perhaps in a separate room to the rest of humanity. That is when feelings and emotions can be so repressed, and often anger is a repressed emotion there. So when then we have an awakening experience, sometimes after that we can feel a little insane. We can feel a little mad. I remember many, many years ago when I had quite a powerful awakening experience. For the next 2 weeks, I thought that my mind was going insane. I would have, my brain was scrambled. Thoughts were not coherent. I was able to continue on, so to the outside observer, I probably seemed normal. But inside, I definitely wasn't. And I was living in an ashram at the time, it was in my 20s. And I wondered if people could tell that I was going mad. But later I realized, through the help of some advice from a teacher, what had happened, and it settled down. At the same time, though, I was also actively working with clearing. And I think that's the important thing. If we've had an awakening experience and we have a lot of emotion arising, even if it's just been a glimpse, it's best to allow that through. Now, there's a delicate balance between allowing it to arise and pass through and indulging in it. because sometimes we can also indulge in our emotions and our feelings. Feelings, I am saying, are more the bodily sensations, and then emotions are that energy that wants to be in motion. So emotion is expressed as that energy that's been released from a held pattern or a held trauma, and it wants to move through. So when we have a burst of emotion, if we allow that to move through clearly, with in mind, keeping in mind ahimsa, which means we would do no harm to anyone else, but if we allow that emotion to flow through, we can be clean after that. And that might be, we might just need to cry and let it out. We might need to just go somewhere and scream and let it out. We may feel that there's a rage inside, and there may be a need to chop wood and carry water. So it needs to be flowing. If it's not flowing, it will become suppressed, and that will lead us toward depression. How does that sound, Kathy?
Yeah, good. All, great comments to be taking on board. I guess my question was more towards understanding the difference between patterned, what were you talking about? Your patterned self and pure consciousness.
Okay, great. That's easy. Pure consciousness is always balanced. It's always clear. There are no separate patterns in pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is the one ground bed of all that is occurring here and everywhere, in every moment, but only in the moment. So pure consciousness, and when we're feeling that flow, there are no ripples in the water, there are no ripples in the mind. Sat Chit Ananda. There are no ripples. The mind becomes still. It becomes a mirror, a reflection of pure consciousness. So everything else is patterns. Everything else that is causing ripples within that consciousness are patterns arising, passing through, getting stuck. You know, we can look at that lovely idea of the river of life, and that the river in flow is always clean, the water is fresh. But when the river becomes stagnant and it is blocked, you know, the water will become stagnant. If we're floating with that flow, we are in flow. If we're holding onto the bank for dear life with fear, then we're not in flow. If we're going in a whirlpool, spinning round with one particular issue, repeating and repeating, you know, we're not in flow with the river of life. There are so many different scenarios that can occur, but it is the patterned self which keeps us out of flow. Consciousness is always clear. And when we're speaking of that, our words are clear. There is no residue. But when we're speaking as the separate self, there is ownership. There is investment. There is expectation. There is judgment. Is that a little clearer, Kathy?
Definitely. And is that when we can learn or practice trusting our body and listen to our body for that feeling of calm, that feeling of, just the clarity, even your mind thoughts, that they're clear, and it's just like a sudden knowing that while it might seem like a crazy thing to do, to you, it seems perfectly right, as an example.
Yes, Kathy, when there are no ripples in the pond, when everything is clear and free. We do have to be careful, though. The separate individual self is very sneaky, and it can disguise itself as the spiritual one or whatever. So we do really have to be careful. And if anyone just tells you they're enlightened and that's it, they never ever have to deal with human emotions or feelings, then don't believe them, because we're all in the same boat here. I'm always aware of you know, if an old pattern comes up, which it doesn't happen very often, and as soon as it does, it's recognized, but it still happens. Okay. And if I was to deny that, that would be a worry, because I would think the separate self is trying to claim something here. You see, awakeness can never be claimed. As soon as you say, I am awake, I am enlightened, who is the I that's speaking? Enlightenment, awakeness is. It doesn't name itself. Name and form are always separate. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. That was a great topic. I'm sure everyone would have enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Okay, we've still got 15 minutes left. So would anyone else like to ask a question? I'll check my chat box. No. So, or add something. Ish, I'll just unmute you, Ish, and lower your hand. Okay, Ish, go ahead.
Yes, when you talked about judgment and, you know, we judge people and that, it reminded me of something that's helped me to, you know, kind of smooth that pattern a bit, is to realize that we are all one, which is what you say, we are the consciousness, but each individual, we are each other. And when I kind of think about that or tune into that, I find it very difficult to reject anyone or anything, as it were. So I think that's helped me quite often, is to remind myself and to talk that we are all one. We all, whatever's going on with the virus or ecology or whatever is going on in the planetary sense, we are all going through it. You know, we as individuals are part of all that, and that is part of us. And I find that connects me into the compassion and supportive kind of elements in life. So I don't know if that's something you can expand on, or you can shed some light for me on that. I'd be appreciated.
That's why we really love this beautiful greeting of Namaste, because, you know, and I don't think we've developed a beautiful circle dance with that, where, you know, we face each other and we share that I am you, you are me, we are one. It's a very powerful thing, and we actually did it last weekend, or maybe the one before, with a group of about 300 people in a room, where we did this beautiful song, our Namaste song, and everyone was paired up and moving around the room and greeting each other with eye contact. And it's such a powerful thing to do, to look into another's eyes and to recognize that I am you and that you are me, and as far as consciousness goes, there is only one of us here, which is why this sort of satsang is such a beautiful thing that we can offer to each other, because we are as we share and as each of you share, I just know that everyone else in the room could have said that, could have shared that, or would have had that question. So we're showing each other here how alike we are, and that we are all working on clarity. And it's something I do myself, actually, Ish, and it's a very beautiful thing to do. I was quite challenged this weekend with my 25-year-old son, who had fallen on the dance floor in a club and done his knee, and I ended up picking him up at 2:30 in the morning and then spending half a day in a hospital with him, to look at him and see his pain, and also to feel his shame because he was embarrassed his mother had to pick him up because he'd come to visit, and to stay with that and to love him and not to judge him, and to look into his eyes and see that that could have been me many, many years ago. I haven't been clubbing for a while, but you know, that you know, what's that lovely saying? There by the grace of God go I. And you know, we all could be walking in each other's shoes. Something as I get older, I also recognize, as I see the older population, I see how invisible our elders have become. I often now look at, you know, when you see an 80-year-old or an 85-year-old and they're hobbling along, and this body will be like that too one day. And then this evening, before this, we had a dinner, and all my family came around, and after being in hospital, I didn't end up cooking rice, dal and sabji. We got pizza delivered. And I was playing with my little grandchild who's just crawled for the first time properly today. And I'm thinking, gosh, you know, there's such an incredible juiciness here in this humanity. The innocent eyes of a baby and just learning to crawl. And then the other extent is our elders as this body ages. And I notice that more and more, how invisible our elders are. And then, you know, there's the young ones who are still clubbing and doing that. Consciousness is expressing in so many incredible ways. It's miraculous, and all of it is me. That's me there falling on the dance floor. That's me there learning to crawl. That's me there leaning on a walker with grey hair. And when we see that, it really does change the perspective. So yes, Ish, I hear you, I agree with you, and it really does, you know, when we wake up and we realize that there's only consciousness expressing as this incredible human and animal and plant and rock expression here, it's truly a miracle, and all of it is me. And it's mind-blowing. It's just so mind-blowing, isn't it? So we're coming towards the end of our satsang, and Terry's our tail end Charlie, or our bookend. So I'm going to pass over to Terry. I'll just mute you, Ish, and unmute Terry. So Terry, would you like to do your wonderful share?
Well, as usual, I don't know what I'm going to say.
Perfect.
What Soraya was saying earlier about dropping the patterns, or dropping thought processes or whatever. You know the expression, it's easier said than done. Well, I'm going to swap that round, because it's actually easier done than said. As soon as you try to work out how to do that, you're stumped, because from the point of view of being completely caught up in the thought patterns, all you can see is separation. And there is no process of passing between the being caught in the process, in the patterns, and being outside of it. Because thought creates time, and outside of the process of thinking, there is no time. And so you can't say, well, I'm going to go into the thought patterns, I'm going to come out again. It's not possible. It's just, there's no distance between the two. There's either in or out, and that's simultaneous. So it's just a question of literally blinking and making friends, learning to make friends with the emptiness. Because also from the point of view of being caught, being identified, coming out of that identification is seen by he or she who is identified as being death, ending of me being caught in patterns. Because it's jumping into a void. Because outside of the thought processes is emptiness. So to make friends with emptiness, that's why they say that enlightenment is an ongoing thing, because every time you blink and jump, allow the emptiness to take you. Each time you do that, you have less fear, because you see that actually it's okay to do that. Just to blink and allow it to dissipate. Let go and just be, and things move on. They always will move on. There's not going to be anything. All the monsters are in the whole process of thinking, you see. Outside of that is what Soraya refers to as the ground of being, the consciousness, the pure consciousness, which contains all that stuff. So we have to practice allowing that space to be there without being afraid. And we can only do that by doing it, not by trying to work out how to do it. It's not a question of method. It's not a question of how. It's a question of taking who we are and being it. Stepping into being, which is the emptiness that contains everything.
And we're either awake or we're not. It doesn't matter how many awakening experiences you may have had in your life. You're either awake to the moment or you're caught in a pattern.
It's like going to sleep. I've never actually experienced the whole process of going from consciousness to unconsciousness. It's just blip, blip. You can't travel between consciousness and unconsciousness. Even in physicality, you cannot do it. It's either this or this. Blip, blip. So blink and allow the emptiness to take you back.
Which is why meditation and prayer is often utilized as a tool to practice being in emptiness and quietness. we're really little human doings, aren't we? Rather than human beings. We're always doing. And we can even be doing and still be clear. But most doing involves a lot of thought, desire for achievement, or we're doing to get somewhere, to be something, to achieve something, to make something. Ultimately, when awakeness is flowing here, even when we're doing, there's not much going on. It is a clear doing. It's a clear action. Whereas many actions and doings are, they're accompanied with a whole lot of thoughts. Even when the doing is happening, there's still doubt whether you're doing the right thing. But it's happening, It's like treading water rather than going with the flow of the river. Did you want to add something to that, Terry? No.
No, but just to say that, it's not been an easy path. Looking back on it, all I can say is that it does become easier as you step into being more and more, because the fear is the thing that, it's the real fear is the thing that gets in the way, that creates the gap between being and being identified in that whole maelstrom. It's a maelstrom of thinking. At the center of the cyclone is the still point, and that's who we are. That's who we are.
And it's often that fear of the annihilation of the self, which is exactly what we need, of course, annihilation of the separate self. But the separate self does not want to be annihilated. It wants to be in control. It wants to be the one that gets enlightened. But as soon as it's I'm enlightened, it's lost. Enlightenment either flows here or it doesn't. Awakeness is here or it isn't. Very, that's just the way it is. But taking space for quietness, speaking less. When I say meditation, I don't necessarily mean you have to sit in lotus on a cushion or do any particular practice, but just to be quiet, to become the observer, to notice what's passing through, and to realize that that is not who you truly are. To be able to do nothing and notice when there is a silent doing nothing. If the thoughts all start crowding in, see that you are not those thoughts. They are simply flowing through. That's just a stream which goes on with or without your awareness. But it's not who you are. And coming to greater understanding, greater clarity, greater and greater clarity, that there's only one thing going on. There's only one of us here. Expressing as all these wonderful beings in this room and on this planet. And it really all points to love. The awakening as it happens, compassion occurs naturally. A greater sense of love and care occurs naturally. We don't have to try to do anything. It all simply occurs naturally. There's no effort required. We are moved and we are lived through by consciousness itself. We are directed by unseen hands. We are directed without instruction that's verbal or translatable. We are lived. And when we surrender to that being lived without claiming any of it for the separate self, we are free. In those moments, we are free. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing up, which means you're all committed to greater clarity. It's really, this is one of the most powerful things we can do, to come together, to remind each other. So thank you all for being me, reminding me to stay clear. I love you all, and I hope to see you in a fortnight. I have recorded this satsang, and if the recording's okay, with everyone's permission, it will go up as a podcast and be shared, so that some of those people who couldn't join us tonight may see some pointing here that will help clarity there. Namaste. Lots of love, everyone. Join me for upcoming podcasts. And please, if you found this helpful, or you'd like to share a comment, or perhaps your own experience, I'd love for you to leave that message down below this podcast. I enjoy reading your feedback, and I'm sure we can all help each other to hold hands, to remain awake, present, clear, and loving. Namaste.